Hello everyone, this is Sergei from Ushanka Show again, and another story, my recollections about life in a Soviet information paradise. Just another day in Soviet information paradise, right? So, I already mentioned in my previous video how shocked I was when I saw for the very first time Soviet wanted posters showing faces of criminals. And I mentioned that Soviet newspapers, if there was any news about some crashes, train crashes, factories exploded, submarines sinking, it was always about Western countries, what happened there. In Soviet Union, it was birds chirping, planes are flying and always landing. So it created this kind of weird sense of security and safety, although we had some horrible crashes. For example, in 1979, August 11, 1979, there were two passenger jets collided mid-flight above Ukraine, and the total amount of people that perished was 178 passengers and pilots. But what was kind of unique about that case, that the entire soccer team Pakhtakor disappeared. So there were rumors. I mean, I was too young. 1979, I was only 8 years old. So there were rumors. Then suddenly they were like gathering players from other teams to rebuild Pakhtakor. So people kind of knew, but it was nothing on. Can you imagine this size of news, like Red Wings? Hope never happened to them. The entire team get killed in an air crash. That will be huge news, right? Even back in the 70s or 80s, especially now. But then it was all kind of hush-hush. There's a monument. Of course, all soccer fans kind of figure out, so the rumor mills. But otherwise, everything was safe, no worries. So I grew up, being a nerd, or they say botanik or botan in Russian. I started reading adult newspapers, to put it away, not like dirty newspapers, but not I always subscribed for children's newspaper, Pionierskaya Pravda, Pioneer Truth, but I always read also my parents' newspapers, not my dad's. I wasn't really into sports, except when in the winter there'll be some Olympics or performances of ice skaters, and Katarina Witt, that was an East German ice skater girl. I had a crush on her. That was the only time you could see in the newspapers kind of legs, right? Anyway, but this is not the video about that. So I apologize. So then Perestroika, Gorbachev came and he introduced Perestroika, so like a reconstruction of the Soviet economy. And he also introduced Glasnost, which can be translated like openness, not freedom of speech, but openness. Like, we need to talk more about our problems in order to fix problems. When you sweep the dirt under the rug, it doesn't fix problems. You just have a bigger hump under the rug. So that was the general idea. But then his Glasnost went into direction he didn't plan, like freedom of speech. But one of the things that occurred, and that was a huge shock for me. So, I always read newspaper. So one day I'm opening Trud Labor newspaper and I'm reading an article. So that was around probably October 5th, in October 1986. So it's already bad enough in spring of 1986, April, Chernobyl power plant exploded. Now it's October, and I'm reading newspaper, and it says that the Soviet submarine, I don't remember if they mentioned that them, was a Kilo 219, had a explosion at fire, and it sunk, in the area of Bermuda Islands. And I just remember my shock. It's the first time in my life I'm reading about this tragic event. There's a lot of, I didn't research how many sailors perished, but just reading the news that our submarine sunk. It's not like listening to enemy voices on the Voice of America, because most likely they're lying. This was in our Soviet newspaper, Soviet story about Soviet accident. And that was, I remember, like when I read that made up ad about a criminal with a square head, that was just confusion. Here, I can't even describe my feelings. It was just like, oh my God, it's like Chernobyl. I guess it was a little kind of erosion of my beliefs in the Soviet system, because when we found out that the Soviet government was either lying or hiding information, and here they just like, boom, we lost a submarine, it sunk, some sailors were saved, and that was they never ever admitted any military incidents, like was never, it's probably where nuclear bombs dropped by accidents, didn't explode, or other things that happened in the army was never ever, and then suddenly it's just like boom in the main newspaper, and that was a huge shock. So that was kind of, maybe there was another factor what kind of added to Soviet people becoming delusioned in the whole Soviet system, because suddenly, and that's what kind of also maybe makes people confused in some way, because like, hey, before Gorbachev came, everything was great. There was no bad news. We were just working, 100% employment, 0% homeless people, everything's great, barely any criminals. We're just building our socialism society, no problems, trains make on schedule, planes over land, factories don't explode. And then Gorbachev came and suddenly we're reading the newspapers, factory blew up, fire here, somebody got robbed, our submarine sunk. It's just that avalanche of bad news, I think maybe overwhelmed a lot of people, and it's how they blame Gorbachev. Like, look, Gorbachev came to power, suddenly, shit hit the fan. I apologize for my French. So that could be one of the reasons that people quickly got delusioned in the whole Soviet system, because suddenly, like, there was just, newspapers were more than happy. Hey, I can sell more newspapers if I provide more details, juicy details about some crimes or accidents, provide more pictures. So that was another kind of this weird feeling that suddenly, technically we were like Amish horses, and Gorbachev removed whatever those side thingies, whatever they called, and suddenly we saw the entire picture, and that was a shock. But it's just, that's another thing that stuck in my mind, is like I was pretty much horrified, like reading these words that our submarine, catastrophic failure, so many of them sailors perished. They tried to save the submarine, but they couldn't, so it sunk, and then the dinghies in the middle of the ocean. I think it was maybe Americans saved them, or someone else, wasn't Soviet. I don't think it was a Soviet crew that saved our Soviet sailors, submariners, but that was another information shock, and that was really stuck in my mind, and I still remember to this day just sitting. I was in my room, I even remember, I grabbed this newspaper, sat down, like going through it, and I was like reading, like, what the hell? Somehow I missed it on TV or radio, maybe it didn't come up yet, but that was just like listening to this, like reading about it, and it didn't feel good. So anyway, so that's another story from my Soviet experiences with information and living in a Soviet informational paradise. I hope you liked the story. If you did, please don't forget to like it, and we'll talk to you soon. До побачення. Goodbye.